There was a law, and Doug talked about it so beautifully in his session there, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly here, but there was a law established in Deuteronomy chapter 24, right, where he says if a husband, and he divorces and she goes with some other man, he cannot take her back. Can't do it. Can't take her back because it's an abomination. And yet you see all through the prophets, okay, I'm going to divorce you, but I'm going to win her back once again. So yeah, I mean, Doug said it too. The angels had to have been up there in heaven going, huh? How are you going to do that? How are you going to? You said in your own law that you can't do that. So how's that going to work? Well, we already figured it out, right? The only way the husband could take back the bride he had divorced without breaking his own law would be to die for her. That's the great mystery. In dispensation theology, we always hear that Paul figured out the mystery of the church. It was concealed in the Old Testament or revealed in the New Testament. Have you heard that? Nonsense. It's all over the Old Testament. The church, the congregation, the ecclesia, it's all over the Old Testament, especially from the time of Sinai. Right? We see it all over the place there. The mystery was, how could he take her back after he divorced her? And that's why I get, people, we talk about Hebrew roots, and I if you follow me on Facebook or anything, I always distance myself from the title. I don't like the title, the Hebrew Roots Movement, even though I believe we are going after our Hebrew roots. But the reason I do is because there are certain personalities within the so-called official movement that have decided to throw Paul out. They think Paul's a heretic, that he failed the Deuteronomy 13 test. And many of them are getting rid of Yeshua too. They're dropping Jesus and the whole New Testament. There's a whole YouTube channel on 10 reasons why I reject Jesus in the New Testament. And all these former Christians are now in the Hebrew roots thing and completely getting rid of the New Testament, Paul and Jesus. I don't want anything to do with that. So don't put a label on me. If you're going to say Hebrew roots, then it comes with all the baggage sometimes of some of these other personalities that I don't want to associate with. I love Paul. I never understood Paul before because it seems like he contradicts himself so many times. But I've become fond of saying you can't understand what Paul wrote until you understand what Paul read. We call ourselves New Testament Bible-believing Christians, but that's like going to Barnes & Noble or Amazon.com and ordering the greatest best-selling novel of all time, skipping 3/4 of the book and starting in the last 25% and thinking you have any clue who the main characters are, what their motivation is, or why anybody's doing anything. If we don't understand what's going on in the Old Testament, what's going on with the divorce and what's going on with the reconciliation and how he's going to bring the two back together, we are clueless. We have no idea who we are or what Yeshua actually did for us. That's the mystery of the church. And once your eyes are sort of open to it, we've read these verses before. Some of you may have even highlighted it, maybe put an annotation next to it, but we didn't really understand it before. He talks about that in 1 Corinthians 7:39. But if her husband is dead, she's at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord. And Romans 7 is like just amazing. But you notice that he says, I'm speaking to those who know the law. So unless you understand the Torah, specifically Deuteronomy 24, you have no idea what he's saying in the rest of, really Romans chapter 7 through chapter 11. I would contend that if you don't understand what's going on with Deuteronomy 24 and Jeremiah chapter 3 and the book of Hosea, you shouldn't even read anything Paul wrote because you're not going to have a clue what he's talking about. I didn't, even though I had it all highlighted and annotated and preached on it before, didn't have a clue. I think the Holman Christian Standard Bible renders that particular verse, chapter 7, verse 4, a little clearer. Therefore, my brothers, you also were put to death in relation to the law. Which law? The whole law? Or just, like Doug pointed out, the law of the bride, right? Through the crucified body of the Messiah, so that you may belong to another, to him who was raised from the dead. Who was raised from the dead? Right. That we may bear fruit for God. Hosea talks in chapter 2, verses 17 through 20. O Israel, I will wipe the many names of Baal from your lips, and you will never mention them again. I long for that day. I don't get all crazy about, in the sacred name movement, some people get all really wrapped around the axle about things. But I love it when, I grew up in a King James only environment, and I read the King James. I've studied it since age 7. It's my preferred study Bible to this day. But when they try to tell me it is perfect and literal word-for-word translation, I'm going, word for word? How in the world can you say that when they replaced the holy name of God over 6,000 times? 6,000 times, over 6,000 times. They took the name of God out and put a title, which basically means Baal, or Baal means the Lord. That just, I think it's important that we know his name. I don't think God gets upset that we're pronouncing it wrong. If we're saying Yahweh, Jehovah, Yahuwah, whatever, he's happy that we're at least trying to say his name. We're doing the best we can with consonants, But he's going to wipe away the names of the Baals, and he's going to make you his wife again, showing you righteousness and justice, unfailing love and compassion. I will be faithful to you and make you mine, and you will finally know me, not as the Lord. It just says I'm going to wipe the names of the Baals out of here. You will finally know. I love it when it says, my name is the Lord is my name. That's not a name. That's a title. But when we talk about the Baals of the world, this is what we're talking about. And I would contend that most of these go directly back to Nimrod. And I'll talk about that more in tomorrow's session. Hosea 2, 22 through 23. Then the earth will answer the thirsty cries of the grain, the grapevines and olive trees, and they in turn will answer Jezreel, God plants. At that time I will plant a crop of Israelites and raise them for myself. I will show love to those I called not loved, and to those I called not my people, I will say, now you are my people, and they will reply, you are our God. Who's he talking about? Israel, right? Oh, well now all of a sudden you know what Paul's talking about. Because he's quoting Hosea. Yeah, oops. I just got into a debate with somebody on Facebook about this whole Gentile thing. I'm like, don't call me a Gentile, I'm not a Gentile. I was born a Gentile, but according to Romans, if I've accepted Yeshua as my Savior, I'm grafted into the cultivated olive tree. Paul breaks it down for us if you just read him. Go ahead and make a kindergarten picture for you if you have to. If you were not blood born into the house of Israel, then you're of the wild olive tree over here. If you are born blood into the house of Jacob, then you are of the cultivated olive tree with Hebrew roots. Right? But if you don't believe in Yeshua, what happens to your branch? Right? But if you're over here in the cultivated, with the wild olive tree with pagan roots, but you do believe in Yeshua, what happens? Well, you get grafted in. Or if you are a blood-born Israelite that previously didn't know Yeshua and decide you want to accept Yeshua, what happens to you? Get put back in. But there's only one tree. There's only one church. It's Israel. It's pretty simple. Doug touched on this also, Ephraim and Judah. And basically, and Doug and I have had conversations offline about this before. It's like, in the past, we kind of had this view that there were two brides, right? One for God, Israel, and one for Jesus, Christians. No. God has one people, one bride, one plan, which has never changed. John Nelson Darby is the one who invented the bogus doctrine of dispensationalism, creating division where there never was before. What's ironic, though, is that most dispensationalists, when they hear me talking like this, they accuse me of talking about replacement theology. I'm like, no. If you believe this, you believe in replacement theology. If you believe for thousands of years it was Israel, cross, boom, church. That's replacement. Hello? And even that I didn't really fully understand until I married Sheila. She had a 13-year-old son when we got married, and I adopted him and gave him my name. He didn't replace me. He was not a Skiba, now he is a Skiba. He is heir to whatever my family has to leave for him. He's part of my family now. He didn't replace me, he was grafted into my family. Adopted, and that's what Paul's talking about. Romans 7 through 11 and Ephesians 2, grafting, adoption. That's what he's talking about. And what's interesting there is, and again, Doug touched on this also in Genesis 48, when Jacob crossed his hands with the blessing, right, over Ephraim and Manasseh, and it says that Ephraim will become the multitude of nations. Help me out with this, Doug. Milo ha-goyim. Did I say it right? Yeah. Interestingly enough, Darby got that. He understood that. In his own translation, in Darby translation, he says that his seed will become the fullness of the nations, the fullness of the Gentiles. He got that. And yet his doctrine completely ignores that. We just covered that right there. That's the Gentiles right there. Concerning the Gentiles, this is quoting Hosea chapter 2. Then the Lord said to me, go and love your wife again, even though she commits adultery with another lover. This will illustrate that the Lord still loves Israel. How many of you are married? Let that scripture sink in. Go and love your wife again, even though she commits adultery with another lover. This will illustrate that the Lord still loves Israel, even though the people have turned to other gods and love to worship them.